Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. Small town feel with big time ideas. After all, you are entitled to Brad's opinion. Here's your host, Brad Allard.
Well, nice weekend coming up. It's going to be hot, which, I've been in Texas almost all my life, and I still can't get used to some of these summers. How about you, Josh? You doing all right?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
It's been a crazy month.
Oh, yeah, it has been. You think, June, it's a lot quiet or whatever else. Well, there's things going on. And I don't mean nationally. I'm talking about at the Allard estate. I've talked about my dad's situation more than once, so we're dealing with that. But other than that, summertime for our school teachers. So, June was our favorite month because you get up in the morning in the middle of June, and you still had another 8 weeks left.
Yeah.
And then, but that last, the summer, the first week of August, that's when you started getting all clinched up. I didn't mind school. What I hated was in-service because it was a beating and a lot of sitting around and polishing the seat with your backside. But anyway, today we're going to talk about the school education bill that passed. And frankly, I was expecting about 3 months ago for me to not be excited about it, but there are some parts of it I actually think are pretty good, and I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about the parts I consider to be concerning, to say the least. But I can't, as an overall objective look at this, think it was a bad bill. I think for the most part, it was pretty good. But again, there were a couple of parts that I could have done without, and I mentioned those a couple of weeks ago, and I got some comments about that, what I was concerned about, and I'll mention them again. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about the No Kings protest over at John Jones in Wilshire. Hey, hello, Miss Hooley. Hey, Dina Martin Hooley. How you doing today? I was asked by several people on the Facebook when I posted about it, how did it come about these views that I had? Some were, respectful. Of course, most were, actually. There were several that pushed back on me, and that's fine because they didn't approach it from a hostile point of view. And if I'm going to sit there and say you're entitled to my opinion, they're entitled to give me theirs, like Miss Hooley said, I believe. But I want to show where I got some of these ideas about what Mr. Trump is doing and what happened on Saturday. So that'll be the last third of the show, roughly. But as far as the sponsors, I usually when I do these political rants, I'm really not comfortable putting them on there because they have their own opinions, but they make this possible, and they make it possible for y'all to respond, whether you agree or not. And so that's to their credit, but these are my views, and I don't want people to assume that they're their views as well. If you want to know what Otto or John thinks about this, call them. But they do make this whole platform possible, not just for me to rant, but for you to rant back. So there you go. All right, first of all, there's certain parts of the bill that haven't been signed into law yet. A lot of people don't really know how the Texas legislature works. I think it's very, very similar to the U.S. Congress. Well, there's one key difference is that if the president gets a bill in the last 10 days, he doesn't have to do anything with it, and it automatically is vetoed. It's the pocket veto, as they call it. We don't have that here. In Texas, if Governor Abbott gets a bill with the last 3 or 4 days of the session, he's given like overtime, another 20 days in which to sign the bill. So pretty soon, probably this week, you're going to read in the paper a whole bunch of bills getting signed at once in some big ceremony. Okay, so he was given extra time for that. So a couple of these have not been signed into law yet, but they probably will be. So I'm going to approach it as it were. But some of the stuff here that really is already part of the deal, let's look at. First of all, everybody's focused on the voucher issue. I'm going to focus on that second. What I want to focus on was the $8.5 billion that they put into the system. And it's like, depends how you want to look at it. Good thing or not so good thing? I think it's a good thing. But if you were a superintendent or an administrator of the school system, you might not think it's so great because most of the money, most of that $8.5 billion is not given to the school districts to use at their discretion solely. It's not what the school districts wanted was basically an increase of funding per student. And they did get an increase per student, but a very, very small amount, $55 per student. So that's the only money they're going to have that's discretionary for them to use. most of the money of that $8.5 billion are going to go to salaries. It's going to go to staffing. It's going to go to security. It's going to go to certain educational programs, certain special ed programs. I mean, it's dictated money. And I was talking to a couple of people that deal with superintendents and unrelated, they're financial people more than education people. And they said the superintendents aren't particularly happy with all this because they wanted to have a situation where they could spend the money as they thought they needed it. Now, I'm not surprised the state of Texas did this because I've mentioned this anecdote before many years ago. I had the son of then Representative Rob Orr in my class, and I was kind of kidding around with this son, and I said, hey, tell your old man if you need some advice, just let me know, and blah, blah, blah. And son of a gun, 2 weeks later, that representative did call, and we talked for about an hour on the phone about the call was originally about Hill College, but it got into broader educational funding. And one of the things he told me then, what Robert told me then, is the frustration when many of them felt that they put money into the system and to be spent in other ways than they intended. Because usually when these legislators spend the money, what they want is either better salaries and also maybe certain other educational programs. Instead, the superintendents will spend it as they see fit and that kind of thing. Now, let's be very clear. When I talk about superintendents, I am using a generality. I'm not making an accusation of BSD or Dr. Jimerson or anything like that. So let's not make that connection because I don't know how Dr. Jimerson feels about this personally, nor do I know how he would spend the money. So I don't have any inside information along those lines. Hang on, I'm going to get this saved for everybody because it's a big deal. But the point is that so don't take it as I am representing BISD or anybody else in this area. Here, I'm going to share this because I think it's important. We all know. There's that one, and one more. There we go. Okay, back to the matter at hand. So again, a lot of this money, I'm not going to break it down that specifically over and over again because it just inundating you with facts and figures, but that's the gist of the bill is that yes, you're getting one of the largest increases. I think it is the largest increase in educational spending in our history, but you're not going to have free rein to do what you want. And that's, where the money is dictated to, I can't argue with most of it. Okay, so let's look where it goes. First of all, one of the biggest things is going to be the teacher raises, and it depends not just on everybody getting the same amount of raise or based on experience. It's also going to deal with size of your school district. So I'm just going to read it. I got this information, by the way. I'm getting it from the Dallas Morning News and from an online study of the bill that I found to be fairly objective. Not a lot of commentary. Also. I took some material from the legislative website itself so I could see what exactly they're talking about. For example, though, let's talk about the funding. For pay raises, if you teach in Grandview or Itasca or Rio Vista, you're going to get a decent raise, that's for sure, because basically with school systems with 5,000 or fewer students, you're going to get $4,000 for each classroom teacher with at least 3 years and less than 5 years of experience, and $8,000 for each classroom teacher with 5 or more years of experience. So that's a pretty healthy raise. So if you're teaching in the school like Rio Vista, according to this, you're going to get a very substantial raise. Now they're paid much less than say a DFW area teacher is. So this is a way of catching up. But one of the things the superintendent's always talked about is how difficult it was to maintain teacher levels because these teachers will come in. A lot of them are pretty young because they're the ones that are getting hired, and they'll come in these smaller school districts, and the superintendents can't keep them because they'll teach a couple of years in a small school, and then they'll go to Arlington for a big whopping raise, or Mansfield, or Joshua pays pretty well, comparatively speaking, to other districts. And so and this is the same thing in Burleson. It's like we paid about midpoint for new teachers. In fact, new teachers actually got a little bit better off than certainly when I started. But after a couple of years, they could make more money in just about any surrounding district except, like Joshua, Mansfield, even Everman, okay, and Crowley. So they'll go there for more money. And this is going to hopefully keep them more attention. Now, as far as the larger districts, 5,000 or more, they're going to get less money. But doggone it, I got my things all messed up. They're going to get about $2,500 $2,500 for teachers with certain experience. And here we go. Teachers with 3 to 4 years of experience in school districts with more than 5,000 students will earn a $2,500 raise, while those with 5 or more will get $5,000. Now you say, well, why do the smaller districts get more money? Because again, like I mentioned, they have a lot harder time retaining teachers. It is a very difficult thing to do to keep math and science teachers in smaller districts, because again, the money and the need is universal for those teachers in particular. So again, if you're in a bigger district like ours or Mansfield, you're not going to get quite as big a raise. But if you're like a 6-year teacher, you're going to get a $5,000 raise. What's the other side of the coin is, we're going to have to hope that the legislature maintains that level of funding, because if they ever have to cut funding like they did about 15 years ago, then it's going to be very hard for the smaller districts in particular to maintain those higher salaries. So that's part of it. Another part of it is that the school districts have until 2030 to make sure that all the teachers there are certified. And No Child Left Behind made that mandatory, but No Child Left Behind pretty much has been gutted. It really doesn't exist in any real form anymore. And again, it's smaller for these harder districts because they may need a science teacher, and they may get somebody that's qualified to teach health, PE, whatever. But they may have that person teach science as well, but they in effect have an unqualified teacher teaching it. No matter how well that course is taught, it could be taught, fantastic, but it doesn't matter. It's still the teacher in front of the room does not have the certification. This gives them about 3 years to get that together. So yeah, the districts are going to be getting a lot more money for their teachers, and there are also raises. I do have the numbers in this pile, but it doesn't really matter. But there's going to be raises of similar nature to school counselors, librarians, school nurses, and most importantly, paraprofessionals. Now, I've worked a long, long time, and I promise you those paraprofessionals are one of the most underpaid group of people you'll ever meet. A lot of them were working there because their kids went to that school or whatever, and so they found that a way to maintain some sort of relationship, whatever, they keep an eye on them, whatever you want to say. But they were one of the most underpaid because they did so many of the harder jobs, not just the office ladies, but I'm talking about also the educational paras. I'm talking about the nurse assistants. I'm talking about just about any paraprofessional job is going to require a lot of that person. And almost all of them can make more money at Target or Home Depot, but they work for us because they're committed to the kids. And again, it was a way that they could share the school calendar with their kids. They got summers off too. And they also, in many cases, were working towards a teacher certification. I know 3 or 4 paras that became certified teachers over there. So that's a really, really good thing. Also, another big thing is they're going to put a ton of money in special ed. Now, usually at special ed, how they put the money in is based on how many you got enrolled and what kind of programs you got. And so this money is dictated. It's going to be sent really based on the kid, him or herself. And so the special ed kids will be the ones that are going to have the money spent on, as opposed to, quote, the program. And so that's a real change as well, because normally how the funding went was, here's X amount for your special ed program, and the districts would portion it out how they saw fit. Under this program, it's the kid himself, herself, that's going to be the designated recipient in a sense. And so they're going to, the money, and there's a lot of it, it's going to go towards special ed. And I think that's a really good thing, obviously, because we would go back to the paras. That, to me, was the hardest job I ever saw in the educational field, was being a special ed para. I mean, you had to have the patience of Job, and you had to have a very willing and loving spirit to do that job. I know I can't do it. So it was, so that's a really good thing about that. Another thing about the special ed is that they're going to have earlier diagnosis of special ed and learning disabilities. That's another good thing. There's going to be a lot of money on the K through 3 diagnostic program. Usually a child is diagnosed maybe twice before 3rd grade. Now they're going to do it mandatory at least 3 times, and you could do it several times. And one of the reasons why it was so difficult, it's so difficult to diagnose a kid, isn't because it's hard to figure out what's the issue here. It's because of the expense. And so basically the school's going to be getting a lot more money to pay for these diagnoses, I think up to $1,000 per. And so it won't be quite as costly for the school districts to diagnose the kids. And I would tell the parents, especially kids, particularly at the younger levels, that's a point you might want to know, is that you have rights as a parent to find out what the status of your child is when it comes to their educational disabilities, if there is one, or whatever other disabilities we're talking about. And so there's going to be more money put into the early diagnosis. And speaking of early money, there's going to be more money for reading and math programs at the K through 3 level. More money for tutorials, more money for small group instruction, more money to put towards all those steps you need to remediate students already falling behind, because the studies will show that if you are behind by the 3rd grade, it's highly unlikely you'll ever catch up. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to go through life illiterate, but what it means is your educational opportunities are going to be limited. And so right now in the state of Texas, about half of our students are either deficient in math or science, many of them both. And so what that studies are saying is those kids that we're talking about that are behind, say, in math in the 3rd grade never do catch up. And same with reading. And so I do think this is a good thing about much more money is going to be placed into intervening in the lives of these students early on with their showing, problems in reading, problems in math. They're either, dyslexic or something along those lines. Hello, Aaron Ash. Hello from Cleburne. How you doing, sir? So that's a really good thing. This isn't exactly Head Start. Head Start's a federal program, but this is very similar to it. And I really do like the small group instruction idea that if you're a 1st grade teacher and you have 3 or 4 kids that are falling behind in their reading or their math, that they can be given extra time. They're not going to be set aside, as from what I understand. They're not going to be taken to another class. It isn't like a separation from the group, but they're going to have opportunities to have small group instruction. Maybe there'll be more money for educational pairs that are in the classroom. That's another thing that Burleson, I know, does. I don't know about everybody, but I know Burleson does, is they have educational pair assistants. And I'd have a classroom, and most of my students that are 504 or had other educational disabilities were in that one classroom, and I'd have an educational pair that would handle a lot of the one-on-one or 1-to-4 instruction while I was doing the 1-to-26 instruction, if you will. So there's that, and that's a good thing. A couple other things that when I say is it concerning, it depends on how the schools handle it, okay? One thing is the banning of DEI in K through 12 schools. Now, everybody gets worked up about the phrase, the DEI phrasing about inclusion and equity and diversity and things of that nature. How one defines it is going to be very much up to the districts, and in your role as a parent or even just as a taxpayer, you do have a role in this. You can, I don't want to say protest or object, but you can, have a formal process to have that program investigated for DEI possible violations. Okay. I think some people get confused about what DEI is exactly. What they think it is they think it's like a reverse discrimination. They think a lot of times it's hiring based on something other than qualifications, and that's part of it. And that has banned in Texas already. But when it comes to curriculum, that's where I'm wondering. That's the real gray area, and that's one of my areas of concern, because is it a violation? Like, I'm going to my own history experience. Am I violating DEI standards if I have them read a portion of Frederick Douglass or Booker T. Washington or W.E.B. Du Bois or Martin Luther King? Because I am focusing on a sector of American history. Am I violating DEI if I talk about the Seneca Falls Agreement, which in 1848 was the original Women's Rights Manifesto about women's right to vote, and et cetera? All right, or if I have a study, we talk about the passage of the 19th Amendment, and we focus on women's history and things like that. Could a parent object to that? And theoretically, they could. Now, I don't think that's good history. I don't think that's good educational practice to omit those particular aspects of history. But that's possible, because that's where one of the areas in which the law is somewhat up to the interpretation of anybody that wants to interpret it. Now, for have a school district that's going to promote certain things, that this DEI ban will prevent that. All right, promote, Black History Month, for example, for lack of a better one. In my opinion, and the thing is, and this is maybe a bit of a controversial opinion, if you have a properly taught history class, you don't need a Black History Month. I mean, you're teaching AP courses like I did, or you're teaching any history course. If you're teaching American history, you must, and by not just by obligation, but by good historical practice, bring in these groups. And so the idea of focusing on one group over another, to me, if you had a properly taught history class, then you wouldn't really need a certain month to shine a spotlight on it. But that's just me. And I never really got that worked up about Black History Month, because I had an AP test to prepare kids for, and we're going to zoom through it as we go through it. So there you are. Also, when it talks about the library materials, the parents do have the obligation or the right to inspect what the libraries of their schools are putting out there. I haven't been in school at BISD in 9 years. All right, so I don't know exactly what the status of the libraries are. I do know that they were moving away from books quite often. But as far as I ever encountered, I did not hear or read about in the paper or anything, anybody finding stuff in the BHS library that one would find objectionable. Now, that being said, I'm not going to say that's a unified way across the districts or across the state. But what would happen is, if parents found to be objectionable material, they can bring it up to the school board and the school districts for review, and they can have it removed. Now, if you're thinking that you're going to have old ladies going through the elementary school libraries and trying to find something they might find objectionable, that could happen. But it'd be up to the school districts to determine whether it's truly objectionable or not. But by explicit statute here in this, any books that talk about gender or gender transitioning or LGBTQ material, that's by definition going to be taken out of the libraries. Now, if it may already have been, for all I know, but I don't know. But that is specifically referenced about gender and gender-related type issues that are going to be removed from the library. Is this going to be a real problem? For a student that is interested in that type of reading, they got the internet, as all I got to say. They don't really need to find it in the school library. But I understand the symbolic in nature of it. But the point is that any kind of reading material that one might find controversial is not going to be withheld from students that are curious about it because of access, because public libraries in the city have this kind of material. I don't know about the Burleson Public Library, but I bet it does. And I don't care, but the point is that in particular is going to be removed from schools if they have it there already. But if you have other material that somebody else finds objectionable, there is going to be a review process. Now, as far as curriculum, they could do the same thing. But see, in BHS and BISD, they had that option already. I do know that in English classes, if a book was assigned that for whatever reason a parent would find objectionable, an alternative book could be assigned. The student would not be penalized for having his or her parent object to the book. Now, in history, in all my years of taught history, I only had one objection to some of the reading I had, and it was, mid-90s. Okay, it was about Frederick Douglass. All right. And it's just, it turned out to be a big nothing burger, so no reason to go through all that. I do know in English classes they went through some of that. And so that has always been your right as a parent. I think a lot of people get the idea that they have no real recourse in dealing with the public school system. They haven't met parents of special ed kids, I can tell you that. They take no prisoners when they come to meet you. All right, they are not there to make friends, and they understand their rights. And I think if more parents would understand their rights, there'd be less confusion about what's going on in some of the schools. Plus, you get a lot of crap on Facebook that says, I think this school's doing this or that and the other. And people, take it and run with it. Also, about discipline, I do like this one as well, that you can have more broader uses of suspension. And I know that sounds a bit harsh, and then a lot of educators object to it because of the possibilities of it being discriminatory against maybe black students or Hispanic students or male students, or you figure out the subcategory. I do know that I'd never really understood that argument that this kid needs to be staying in class because he'll be missing an education. Well, I got news for you. If he is causing enough trouble to be put into in-school suspension or an alternative program or just suspended for 3 days, whatever, he ain't getting no education, and neither are the kids around him. So we're not disrupting his education because he's not getting one. And we're not talking about, suspending a kid for, chewing gum or having his fourth tardy or this kind of thing. We're talking about the serious stuff. All right? Because really the schools have no real interest in being so regimented that the kids are missing school for minor things, because there is that learning loss routine. But right now, if you put a kid in school suspension, there's a 3-day maximum. This removes the maximums. It also kind of lightened up one thing. It used to be if you were caught vaping on school campus, you would automatically put into an alternative program. This would not do that. This would put you in suspension, which means you'd be on campus and you'd still get your educational materials, your stuff from the teachers and stuff like that, and still be required to do your schoolwork, on and on and on. But at least you're not going to be an alternative program, which is a pretty tough move. But the thing about the suspensions also from up till now, the K through 3 were primarily exempt from in-school suspensions unless they brought a weapon or drugs to campus, which you think, oh, the kids don't do that. Believe me, some of these kids come from neighborhoods and from homes in which that is prevalent. You may not hear about it in Burleson that much, but I have a friend whose daughter teaches in Dallas, and she teaches and she used to teach in Dallas, and I think she's in Plano, and it happens there as well. Some of these K through 3 kids are coming to school, and they come in from terrible environments, or they may have some issues already because of the mom's negligence during the pregnancy and things of that nature. And so, it's very, very difficult to maintain a first grader or second grader who is obviously not only just disrupting school, but maybe even a threat to the smaller kids around him or her. And so, this might sound harsh, but you got to remember, if you have a class of 28 and you got one kid that's in this situation that is so disruptive that it requires suspension, it's not him only that's losing out. It's all the other kids that teacher has to deal with that one. All the other kids are missing out as well. All right? And we have to think about them as well. I think sometimes in this discussion about in-school suspensions and alternative schools and sending a kid home and all this other stuff, we forget that in pursuit of this one kid, that the other 25 or so are at risk of falling behind as well. Second of all, there is that signal you're sending to not just K through 3, but any K through 12, that this won't be tolerated. Because when they see it tolerated, some others are going to push that line a little further and a little further and a little further, and then you got a real, pardon me, coffee's backing up on me. Then you're going to have a real problem. And so I don't have a real problem with this either. Now, if you have a school system that is dealing, using disproportionate punishments, on different groups of kids, then you're going to have problems. All right? If you have a school district that punishes the black students more harshly than the white students, or the boys more harshly than the girls, you're going to have somebody somewhere make a complaint, and that's legitimate. It needs to be objective. It needs to be uniformly applied. It needs to be universal, and that kind of thing. And I think some people are afraid that's what happened. Well, if that does happen, there's going to be recourse. It's recourse you already have. Okay, again, I mentioned that before. A lot of people think fighting the school system is like fighting City Hall, but you'll be surprised how much recourse and many rights you have along those lines. Now, there are a couple that did give me pause. One is that the posting of the 10 Commandments in all the classrooms. Now, let's not jump to conclusions too far. First of all, the school districts won't be paying for this. the schools are not required to spend public money on the Ten Commandments, so that part of it isn't a factor. They could only put up Ten Commandment plaques or posters or whatever that have been donated to the schools, by private entities or private persons. When it comes to this kind of thing, I understand it's, the Ten Commandments are a valuable moral guide. As a Christian, I understand the highly significant importance of it. I endorse it as a Christian. I try to live by it as best I can. I have slipped in on a Sunday, I'm afraid, but I try to live on it. I do honor my mother and father, and God is my only God, so I don't have Baal or Moloch in the background. How about you, Josh? You got your idol set up on the wall there? No, he's laughing.
Yeah, no.
He's good. All right, but so it's not the content itself. But if you wanted to put him in the middle of the school hallway or like in the main lobby, okay, because I know what happens. Most kids are going to zoom right by it, and they're not going to pay a lot of attention. So this is not something that I would die on. My problem, though, is in the classroom. It may not be as much of a case in Burleson, but you've got a lot of districts here where you have a lot of non-Christian, non-Jewish students. You've got a significant number of Muslim or Hindu students in a lot of other school districts. And you don't want to create a feeling of otherness in the classroom. That's kind of where my point is that if I am not a Jew or a Christian and I see the Ten Commandments, I'm going to feel like I am not part of the main group, that my presence there isn't as welcome as if I were a Christian or a Jew. That's my problem with the Ten Commandments in the room. It's not the content of the Ten Commandments. I'm really not even that concerned about the church-state issue as such. I'm more concerned about the fact is that if I, and I've had a few Muslim students and a couple of Hindu students, not many in Burleson, I don't want them to feel like in my classroom that they are somehow different than all the other kids, and they're not going to be considered, regarded, or treated the same as all the other kids. Okay, Ms. Crisp says the people that voted for the Ten Commandments do not live by them. It is beyond hypocritical. I am actually for putting them alongside other religions as well. I know in Burleson, I don't know if they still do, they did teach a world religions class, and they had that kind of material on the wall. As far as universally across all classrooms, I think that's where the next step is, because if let's say I'm a parent of a Hindu student in Irving, which they have a significant number over there, and they're going to want to have their faith represented. Or if I'm a Buddhist student in Arlington, which they have a significant number, I want my kids' faith represented there. I think we're going down a rabbit hole if we put them in all the classrooms. Now, if you put all those religious texts in the middle of the school hallway, again, let's pick and choose our battles. The kids aren't going to walk by there and be struck, oh my goodness, I have not been respectful of my parents. I don't have a problem with them being reminded of what moral law is about in classroom settings, because when I talk about it in government, I talk about it in history. We talk about religion, we talk about morals, whatever. But the point is that I don't want the student sitting in my class, even if it's just one, feeling like he or she is not part of the class because the Ten Commandments is not part of their religious heritage. So there you go. As far as whether they live by them or not, God only knows that. I know a couple that are pretty devout, so I don't really have a comment on that as such. Another one that kind of concerns me a little bit is the banning of LGBTQ clubs on campus. Now, again, this is another one of those things. This is one of those things that, I don't like the argument, well, then you must be in favor of. Okay, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute about other things. All I know is this, is when it comes to LGBTQ clubs, they're not how-to clubs. I'm going to give you an anecdote. My last year there was a gay and lesbian group. Okay, I don't know what they called themselves, but that's what it was. And we had a teacher that sponsored it. Well, one day this teacher couldn't make that meeting because she had an obligation that she couldn't miss. And she was kind of sad because the kids were going to meet. And I said, just have them meet in my room. I'm going to be doing nothing. I got grading to do. I got studies. I got to make some emails. And so they had to have a teacher in the room, so they used my room. Now, I didn't lead the meeting. I didn't sponsor it. I didn't provide any materials. I just gave them a place to land while I did my emails. But I did overhear some of the stuff. And it basically was a support group. It wasn't so much like, some sort of plot to try to expand the number of gay and lesbians in school or anything like that. It basically would just, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Why don't we do this? They're planning like social events to go to the movies together. It basically was a club in most other ways like a club. It wasn't so much like, they were planning strategies or something like that, and they weren't looking to recruit. What they were looking for was a place that gay and lesbian students could come and have a social life and an outlet for what's going on. And I can tell you right now, the emotional distress placed upon gay and lesbian students is significant. Okay, now, when as a teacher, I had a handful of students that I knew to be gay. And then since I left school and been on Facebook and all that, I found several others, many others, that turned out to be gay or lesbian. And some I'm like, well, okay, I kind of figured, or some is like, well, that's a surprise, move on. But the point is that when you're 15, 16 years old and you're questioning your sexual identity or orientation, it's a very tough place to be because the school kids aren't going to be very sympathetic to that. But you get the people that on the other side of the coin. Well, you must be in favor of, Pride Month. No, I don't. Not in schools. I don't care what Target does, but not in schools. Oh, you must be in favor of girls or boys playing girls sports. No, I'm not. Actually, I'm not in favor of that because of several reasons that really are kind of, I think, be self-evident. But also going back to the otherness factor, I got a classroom of 25 kids, and I got one young man who is gay. He needs to know that he has a place in my classroom. And he needs to know that he has a place in that school, whether or not people outside the situation approve of his lifestyle or not. My opinion of that person's lifestyle is immaterial, okay? And so the point is that the reason why I wrote what I wrote on Facebook and got some critical responses to that is because I don't want that student, that gay student or that lesbian student, to feel like they don't have a place in my room or on that campus. And that they have a place that they can go. And we're not talking about these clubs meeting during class time. They're talking about before school and after school. That's the only time clubs can meet. Okay? Yeah, and that's any club. Student council, honor society, etc. All right? They need to have a place where they can feel like they can unload that burden that they feel. Or share some of the heartbreaking stories. I mean, I heard a couple of them over my course where the kid told his parents, and the reception was very poor. It was not good at all. And who is he going to tell? So the point is that one doesn't need to be waving the rainbow flag to say that these kids have a place in our school. All students have a place in our school. And for them of like nature to get together in the morning or in the afternoon after school to kind of unload what's going on in their lives and maybe plan some social outings, I think is legitimate. And I don't think the school system should really interfere with that, but the state of Texas has made that illegal. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. I'm sure it'll be challenged in court, and we'll see what happens with that. That's by and large the educational part of it. Like I said, the funding I'm actually very pleased with. I didn't really even get into the vouchers. What am I thinking? Josh, you're supposed to remind me of these things.
My bad.
Yeah, that's what. Well, here's the thing about the vouchers. I'm going to have to dig through my stuff because I was too busy wrapping up here. First of all, well, thank you, Irma. She says it's very well said. Well, I've been practicing. Anyway, here's the thing about the vouchers. They're not going to start in the fall. They start a year from fall. So, if you have a kid right now in this situation, you got a year to wait. Basically, they put $1 billion towards it. The experts estimate, at the way it's structured, about 20% of that $1 billion is going to go to families who earn 500% or more of the poverty rate. That's okay. Basically, what the money is designed to do is, if you're 3 times the poverty rate, then your kid would be eligible. Each kid will be eligible. That's around $100,000. Okay. My point has been, and I've discussed it with Greg Cooper and other people. My point has been, if you make as a family $100,000, it sounds like a lot of money, but I could tell you, a lot of families will tell you how tight that budget still is. The average tuition of a private school is between $15 to $20, and the more high level ones are like 25, like the one I came from a few years ago, Southwest Christian. So that money really isn't going to make a lot of a difference to the people that are designed for it to make a difference for it. What they say is this will make it possible for kids in poor performing schools or poor performing neighborhoods to go to private schools with state help, but that's not going to be enough. And any money that is not used, that $1 billion that's unused, they're going to keep raising that cap, so to speak, and that's where the more high end families may be able to take access to this. And they're supposed to have up to $4.8 billion, I believe, in 4 years. So, if they don't raise the caps, you're not really helping the students as much. I'm just saying eventually what this is going to happen. I guess it's the roundabout way of saying what eventually is going to happen within about 4 years, that we're going to be paying quite a bit of money, nearly $5 billion a year in vouchers to families that already can afford to send their kids to private school. Most of the kids at Southwest Christian they had the wherewithal to go, either their family or maybe a grandparent or something like that. There were a handful of students that were middle class, and they were there we had some scholarships, not just athletic scholarships, but other types of scholarships as well. And I can tell you right now, the tuition is just a tip of the iceberg when you go to private school. There's fundraisers, there's trip fees, there's book fees, there's uniform fees, there's whatever else. The tuition is just the beginning. And so even if some family, for however they could manage it, could send, they make $80,000 a year and they could send their kid to Southwest Christian, the bill just started. So I understand if we were talking about kids that were going to O.D. Wyatt or Carter Riverside or schools that are in danger of being closed. It does kind of bug me that the Mira Vista kids and the kids from Overton Ridge and the wealthier parts of Fort Worth are going to get their education subsidized in their private schools. The kids at Country Day and what are eventually, it won't be again tomorrow, it won't be even next year, but eventually the money's going to be there and the parameters are going to be set that those kids are going to be subsidized. And same with like Trinity Valley. I know that, they hit too close to home, Irma. But anyway, there you are. Now let's talk about Saturday. Boy, that was an interesting day. All right. I didn't wake up Saturday morning planning on going to the No Kings protests, but I thought, the kind of show I do, I can't just talk about other people. I want to see for myself what's going on. And so I had to go to HEB anyway, so why not? And so, Irma has a comment on the vouchers. This will just cause more private schools to pop up to prey on the vouchers, which will defund public schools over time. Well, that's true there, too. I think a lot of private schools are going to be created from this bill, and that not all private schools, that's a myth that all private schools are better than public schools. That's a pure D myth. But anyway, back to the protests. So I decided to go and see what it is, and I took some video clips of it, and it wasn't anything that anybody would have been objected to. You don't have to approve of all the messages. There were a couple of signs that I said, I'm not on board with that. I am not on board with abolishing ICE. All right, I am not on. I'm not aboard amnesty for immigrants, even though I was accused of that when I posted this on Facebook. That's fine. Free country, right? Anyway, the point I'm making is that you don't have to endorse every view is there. But I walked through there and I asked, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's fine. How you were treated? Oh, it's good. Josh, why don't you run the clip? I'm going to do it in silence, so I'm going to narrate it in case you're listening to it on the radio or listen in your car. But basically, as you're going through this, you can see just we're not talking about weird radical Antifa radicals and garb and all this other stuff. They were middle-class people, a lot of older people that I guess dusted off their Woodstock T-shirts and got out there. But you look at the scene here, and there's the young people, of course, but I didn't see any action, activity, chant, slogans that I found to be objectionable. Now, again, there was a couple of signs saying, no, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that point of view, but that's fine, and some of the chants, I wish they would kind of update. This is what democracy looks like and whatever. Well, I guess that's true, but still. But you look at this, and if you look closely enough, you're seeing you may see people these are not outliers. These are not, weird people that come out of the woodwork. These are American citizens, your fellow citizens. Now, that being said, a lot of it was protesting. It was called No Kings Protest, and they were all over the country. I read somewhere that, across the country, there's several million. I know in Fort Worth, there what, 5,000-6,000, something like that? Is that right, what I read?
Approximately 5,000. Yes.
Yeah, is that what you read too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fact checking this right now.
Yeah, okay, good. And so you may not agree with what they were talking about, but what you're looking at really is democracy in action. This is as First Amendment as you get. And most people drove by and they honked and they waved and, they shouted, mostly positive things. There were a couple of Trump counter-protesters. I went to talk to them. They said, "How are you being treated?" And they said, "Fine." So they didn't feel like they were being persecuted, but there you go. Now, what I put on my Facebook page is that I was in support of this because not just because of the First Amendment rights and all that business. It's also because I do believe that Mr. Trump has exceeded his authority as president. And I got a lot of pushback on that from several people. But I'll make this point, my point now, is that I do believe that Mr. Trump is very, very arbitrary about how he's using his powers. And some of those powers really belong to Congress, but Congress is the biggest collection of cowards you'll find, and they just hand it over to the president so they can either support him or bitch, and that's it. They don't want to take the hard job of dealing with themselves. But I'll say this again, I do believe Mr. Trump has exceeded what the Constitution has allowed. Now they say, well, what about Trump, or Biden rather? What about Biden? Same thing. What about Obama? Same thing. I've been saying this for 15 years, and I didn't really get offended by a lot of the stuff they were saying to me. What offended me, I guess, was that you haven't been listening to my show then, because I've been saying this for quite some time. I was saying this when Biden was president. I've been saying this in my classroom for 15 years. The use of executive powers has far, far exceeded what the Constitution would allow. And I do believe Mr. Trump is being very arbitrary in his governing. For example, I don't know how it happened, but most of the pushback I got was on immigration, which I didn't expect, but okay. I do believe he's very arbitrary about immigration. And if you want to lose me in an argument, you want me to just shut down, then use the phrase, "Well, then you must be." We use well, then you must be. They take whatever I said to the extreme that I don't support and try to put those words in my mouth. Thank you. I could speak for myself. So when I Ernest says, I remember you saying this with Obama over 15 years ago, LOL. Well, I did. The people that went berserk in 2013 about DACA and the Dreamers executive order have no problem with Trump deciding who goes and who stays. And I'm going to show this particular clip. All right, this is in Trump's own words. Now, you can't hear the question very well, but you can hear Trump. The question is from Peter Alexander of NBC News, and basically he's talking about this new provision that would exempt certain immigrants from being deported. So go ahead. I can't hear it, Josh.
What made you change your mind about targeting in California farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business?
Well, we're not targeting. In fact, if you look today, I put out a statement today about farmers. Our farmers are being hurt badly by, they have very good workers. They've worked for them for 20 years. They're not citizens, but they've turned out to be, great. And we're going to have to do something about that. We can't take farmers and take all their people and send them back because they don't have maybe what they're supposed to have, maybe not. And you know what's going to happen and what is happening? They get rid of some of the people because, you go into a farm and you look and people they've been there for 20, 25 years and they've worked great and the owner of the farm loves them and everything else. And then you're supposed to throw them out. And you know what happens? They end up hiring the people, the criminals that have come in, the murderers from prisons and everything else. So we're going to have an order on that pretty soon, I think. We can't do that to our farmers. And leisure, too, hotels. We're going to have to use a lot of common sense on that.
Okay. I'm good. Okay. because they go on to the things. Here's what drives me crazy. 10 years ago, today was the day that Mr. Trump came down the elevator, so to speak, that golden elevator, and he called illegal immigrants rapists and murderers and crooks. I guess some are good people, but blah, blah, blah. And so what he's doing now is by an executive order exempting certain people from the law. I got all this legal stuff sent to me about, these laws are what he's going by. This law that was passed under this president, this law was passed under that president. I got all this stuff. I didn't think anyone just basically said it's up to the president to decide who stays or who goes, and they just did that. And I would say to the people that want to, take all the illegal immigrants out. They want to take all the illegal immigrants out, and now the president has said, no, they're good. We need to keep some of them. Are they going to change their mind? I'm thinking of 2 or 3 people in particular on the Facebook, but I'm not going to call them out by name because I don't do that. But I'm just saying, they were saying we need to get rid of all these people. And I'm like, well, the president just said we don't. But he's going to decide, well, this group of immigrants can stay, those have to go. Okay? What about the people in the construction trades? Are they going to make the same argument? They very well could. All right? What about the people in other manual labor type related stuff? Can they make that argument? They can. The farm workers. What Mr. Trump just said, I agree of the need 100%. All right? I agree that many of these immigrants really do a vital part of the job. They do jobs like some mentioned that Americans won't do. And they come and they work in the fields, or they clean our toilets in the hotels, or they cook our hamburgers in the fast food joints, or make our food in other places, blah, blah, blah. Or they clean up, they do people's homes. Those are okay. It's everybody else's immigrants that are the problem, according to what, and again, my rebuttal to those who are talking about, and then I must be in favor of open borders. No, I am not. I don't have a problem with closing the borders down. I'm not in favor of amnesty, because a blanket amnesty would allow people who don't belong here to be here. I had people say, well, then you must be in favor of leaving crooks in here. No, I'm not. Again, then you must be argument. I'll know what my argument is, sir. I know what I'm saying. And so the point about all of this is that we need a sane immigration policy that would allow the president to do what he just did without having to go through some executive order, without some sort of arbitrary you stay, you go. And on a side note, this suspension of student visas, that's horrendous. It's not just bad for the college's bottom line financially, but I'm thinking about my students at DBU. I have several foreign students every class at DBU. They come from Central America, they come from South America, a bunch. Some come from Asia, a couple from the Middle East. What are they doing? They come in to get an education in Dallas Baptist, and quite often in ministry-related activities. And then they're going to go back to these countries, many of which are not going to welcome those activities, to spread the gospel. And now we just made it harder because we're going to suspend student visas. And can we say, well, we're going to allow Christians in, but not others? No, thank you. I don't even know. I doubt that's legal, but I don't want that. So that's one of my problems. Now, another rebuttal point I got was that when I was making the point that Trump has exceeded his authority, they said, "Where are you getting this?" And I'll just say, here's an article from the Atlantic Monthly. This is in Trump's own words. It was a long-term interview. For those who've seen it on radio, or hear it on the radio, rather, the quote is, "I run the country and the world." That's a quote from the interview. I read it. I printed it out, read it myself when it came out about 2 months ago. I run the country and the world. Had Biden said that, I can only imagine the rending of cloth and the dumping of ashes on our heads that we would have gone through had Biden said that, or had Obama said that. And this is not a paraphrase. I read the article, I've read the quote, I read the interview, and that is a quote, "I run the country and the world." That's why I think the people who are protesting, the No Kings, they could point to things that he has said, not just what he's done, but what he's said, to validate their protests. You say, well, the Atlantic Monthly's a liberal magazine. Well, Trump didn't have to sit down for it. I will give Trump credit. He'll sit down with just about anybody. I mean, he's a whole lot more available. And I will also say that the point, well, Biden, well, yeah, Biden thought this. Just he was so walled off by his staff and protected by the media that he didn't make these quotes, but he acted like it. I'm not saying this problem is strictly something that was created January 20th of this year. This has been going on for over 15 years where presidents think they can run the world. Obama was arrogant in the way he ran the world in this sense, and it cost him. He was befuddled in foreign policy. Biden was befuddled by getting up in the morning. And so, you like that one, Josh? Yeah. But that they think because they're president of the United States and they got this military involved in lots of stuff, and they got all this power that they could do what they want. Here's another quote that also that gives me reason to think that the people that did protests they could point to things that Trump came out of his own mouth that they could point to, not just exaggerating something he's done. Okay, we are a department store and I set the prices. Okay, I'm going to read the longer quote. This article, came out April 28th of 2025. It was a quote, I believe, in Forbes. It said, "We are a department store. I am this giant store. It is a giant, beautiful store, and everybody wants to go shopping there. And on behalf of the American people, I own the store, and I set prices, and I'll say, if you want to shop here, this is what you have to pay." So much for the free market system, right? Donald Trump will decide what you're going to pay. That's okay. So, if people, I guess when they say, "Well, you're taking it too far about the immigration deal, or you're taking it too far about the tariffs," and today he wakes up and we have a tariff on the EU, and then 10 days later, because of a flattering phone call he gets from the EU president, we're going to suspend him for 30 days, which is exactly what happened. It wasn't 10 days; actually, it was 48 hours. This happened last month, where he put a 50% EU tariff on it, and 2 days later he took it off because the president of the EU came and flattered him a bit. His own words, "She kissed my ass." That's not me saying it. That's his own words. So my point is that the people that protest, you don't have to agree with, and you don't have to like it. And like I said, there's some science that no. I don't want to abolish ICE, and I don't support what's going on in Los Angeles in any way. Protests are one thing, riots and vandalism and assaulting police officers are another. People doing their jobs is another. That's not the same thing. And so don't tie what happened Saturday to what's going on in Los Angeles, because that's not the same thing. But the point I'm making is that's why I said what I said about Trump being president, exceeding his authority. Things like this that come out of his own mouth. It's not just me making up stuff. Now, on that last note, I was taken to task because I connected the Armed Services Parade on Saturday with Trump's birthday. I deleted it from my original post. Why? Not because I was wrong, but I couldn't support it with the kind of stuff I just showed you. What I got that from were quotes from politicians on both sides. They were editorials written in conservative journals in many cases. So I got it from third-party sources. I did get Trump saying it himself. And so, like I just showed you, I was using his own words in those three examples. I couldn't do that with the Trump claiming this was a parade in his honor. So I deleted it because I couldn't support it. Do I still believe it? It's immaterial. It could or couldn't be. It doesn't matter. It's like, to me, it's, if I can't support it, I'm going to move on. And that's it. So I'd like to sum up this last segment. If you're okay with all this going on, okay, I'd rather hear that than justifications. All right? I'd rather hear you say, I don't care. I like what he's doing. I don't care if it's, double standards or not. I don't care if he's, doing X, Y, and Z. MAGA, buddy. I believe in Trump. Okay. I'd rather hear that than justifications. All right? I'd rather hear that than twisting the Constitution or laws or whatever to fit what's going on when you would never have done that for Mr. Biden. And I want to say this point one more time very clearly. I think when history is written about Biden, the Biden administration, he's going to be remembered like Warren G. Harding, one of the most ineffective and poor presidents we ever had. I in no conceivable way think Joe Biden is ever going to be anything above mediocre in the historical rankings. But the things that y'all pulled your hair out about Joe Biden, you seem to be okay with Trump doing it. And if you're going to say it that way, hey, I'd rather hear that than justifications or manipulating the constitutional interpretations or whatever else. And as far as the courts, a lot of people are really angry with the courts, and I get it because the way the courts operate now is a joke. I mean, the idea that we have 94 federal judges and they can find one in Hawaii that agrees with you, and therefore it's going to have a nationwide injunction. Even Elena Kagan said we got to change that system. I get it. The courts in the lower levels have exceeded their authorities in nationwide injunctions. And I did get that point. I agree with that point. I think that is the way the injunctions. I would say the name of the person who brought that up, but again, I don't call people out. But it is a point I agree with, that the courts have exceeded their authority at the lower levels by issuing nationwide injunctions on all like groups and all this other stuff. But all I'd ask the Trump supporters is to acknowledge and understand that sometimes this man goes too far. And when we get to a point where he could do no wrong, then no kings indeed. Okay? Don't abdicate your ability to critically analyze and be objective in your viewpoints of this man. If you like him, fine. You voted for him, great. If you think you have a flag in the front yard, wonderful. First Amendment, all right? You're right. But don't throw away your ability to apply objective common sense and say, well, in this case, Mr. Trump, you're wrong. And I'm saying right now, Mr. Trump, you're wrong if you think that you run the country and the world. You're wrong if you set the prices at a department store that you run. And you're wrong when you could arbitrarily say who goes and who stays in this country. And I would have said that to Mr. Obama, and I would have said that to Mr. Biden. So don't, there's that, therefore you must hate Trump routine. That's horse hockey. And that's a lazy way of arguing. When you accuse your opponent in the argument of, well, you just hate Trump, it's just like saying, I have problems with immigration. Well, you just hate brown people. That's the same thing on the other side. If you have concerns about abortion, well, then you'll take it to extreme. So both sides do it. I have really serious concerns about our border. Then I must be a xenophobe, according to some. That's just rubbish. But I am in this case saying, be objective. Don't give up your constitutional and your God-given rights to use your own mind to objectively analyze and rationalize what's going on. We have a higher standard than Republican or Democrat, which basically is meaningless now. That standard is the Constitution and the laws, whatnot, and it is to a higher authority for most of us. And don't give it up for MAGA thinking or anti-MAGA thinking, because you're just giving up thinking, in other words. And that's all I got to say about that. Now, tomorrow, on a totally unrelated point, I got Mayor Fletcher on. We're going to talk about the Central Appraisal District primarily, and we're not going to be talking about this. Not that he asked not to, but I told him, I texted him, said, we will not be talking about Monday's show. And he said, I'm good with that. so don't, it has nothing to do with any of this. It was a scheduled appointment 2 weeks ago. So we're going to talk about the Central Appraisal District. We're going to talk about some of the issues coming to Austin that affect the cities. Share this with your friends, okay? It does bother me that probably the people I'd be addressing and I'd hope to try to persuade or try to influence their thinking, I'm probably going to boycott this show. I had 2-3 people said, I will not ever listen to your show again. That's their right. I wish they wouldn't, but that's certainly their prerogative. But I do believe that some of the people that are earnest about these arguments need to hear this. And they, and I'll be posting it, and they could rebut to it and all this other stuff. But I hope they hear it. So share it with your friends. You got anything to add, Josh?
No, I think you summed it up.
Okay.
That was a good one.
Well, you liked it, huh? Okay.
Yeah, it was good.
All right. like I said, Mr. Fletcher will be on tomorrow. We're going to talk about taxes in Central Appraisal District. So y'all take care, and thank you for your time. Thank you for the participation, those on the board there.